So we'll begin our usual session with our usual prayer for student and teacher. By now you should all know it, so you're free to join in, please. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Madvidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our studies be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace beyond all. There's a reason why there's an insert in this prayer. May we not cavil with each other necessarily. Because in this modern world, freedom of expression is a big deal. Many people feel they have the right of free speech, but sometimes that becomes problematic. If we're free to speak to anybody in any way we like, then we can easily insult people. So freedom comes at a price. And what we mean by freedom, it means that we have to access a kind of dimension that is free, which means it has nothing to do with the funneling of that freedom, because if it's freedom of expression, it's no longer freedom. It's channeling something that is constricted. And when we talk about having free will and free choice, it is only weighing up a few alternatives. It doesn't seem to reflect pure freedom at all. So, is there an urge, a human urge within us toward this value of freedom? And we have to say yes. When a child is born and just is developing, their brain waves are going into a state where they're just sleeping, eating, and evacuating, and they're the boss in the house for sure, because when the baby cries, everyone goes running. When the baby is hungry, it gets fed. It's clearly the boss. There was a small baby that came with the parents 2 months old. And I made the remark, you see, some people say that all babies look like Winston Churchill, but it's not true, you see. So sweet a thing, innocently sleeping. But this innocent baby will start discovering and being interested in the sights and sounds around. Their sight clarifies, and they become like a sponge of information, absorbing all the things around. By the age of 2, the child becomes challenging. It starts asserting its own will, even before that. And this self-consciousness starts developing. So that a parent's job is very often, how do we give a child an element of freedom and at the same time make the child conform to the parent's will? The child doesn't know what's good for them, what's not good for them. And so the parent has to assert some levels, some boundaries. And very often these phrases, no, don't touch, come up. In the exploratory phase of a child, they will listen to you, no, don't touch. They'll see the look, but still put their hand out in an exploratory way to the crystal vase, regardless of the danger. They don't know if there's any danger. They're curious. Our curiosity is a question actually. Is our curiosity an avenue towards greater freedom? Is that what we're looking for? Are we just looking for knowledge, or are we looking for increasing freedoms? Now, according to Vedanta, every atom is looking for its own freedom. I said this once at a university debate, and scientifically minded students said, you don't mean to say that every atom is looking as if it's a personalized thing. I said, yes, I do. Every atom is sentient. Every rock on a string knows exactly, it's called a plumb line, where the center of Earth is, where the center of gravity is. Don't say it doesn't know where it is. It's absolutely sentient. But we've stripped away the sentiency of all these objects And we've done it by being reductionistic, materialistic. The trouble began with Descartes, where he made this duality, mind and matter. I don't mind, you don't matter, that kind of thing. No, making a duality that led, even when Newton believed in a creator God and couldn't really find any other explanation, then even Newton was thinking that this universe is a mechanical thing. And if the universe is a mechanical thing, just operating like a timepiece, like a watch, then it leads ultimately to 20th century literature that says, or gives titles, or gives themes, the blind watchmaker. It looks as if it's designed, it feels as if it's designed, but actually it's all fraudulent. It only is an apparent thing. It's all just blind chance. Not only is the watchmaker blind, but the watchmaker is dead. So at the worst, you can put it as simply deism, that God made the world and then went on holiday, if you have a theistic attitude. But the Vedanta doesn't mention this creator God. This Vedanta is more concerned with the question, given that my freedom seems to be limited and restricted, is there an area within me that is free completely? Will my investigation inward turn out something that is solid, something that is permanent, something that is not subject to cause and effect? That thing must be a non-aggregate thing. It can have no parts. Anything that has parts, and you look around, everything has parts. Everything has parts, then it must be for the good of another, not for the good of itself. And it will perish. It will disintegrate at some point, and it will be subject to restrictions and cannot be free. So the body is not free. The mind is not free. The mind also has component parts when we investigate it. If you look at the geography of the mind, you can see the various component parts and this willfulness, which we call ego. Now, when you look at things carefully, you'll find a deterministic universe. That means subject to cause and effect. You'll also find a universe subject to criteria of time and space. You can't imagine anything that is not moving. You cannot imagine anything that has no dimensions to it. When you take away space, you've removed all restrictions of objectivity. You've taken away every single one of the 4 dimensions. Why 4 dimensions? Because since 1905, a 4th geometric dimension was added by the scientist Einstein and his special relativity, and said, yes, there are these 3 dimensions of space, no doubt, but time is integrally associated with it. It's a 4th dimension of what exists. And although we don't register it like this, it's okay, it's there, and the equations work it out as being there, but our common day experience is restricted to 3 dimensions, a 3-dimensional universe that we can only express in 2 dimensions. If you're a clever artist, making things look 3-dimensional, no doubt, by perspective, by shadow and or shade and light and angles and so on, by careful use of paint, you can make a 2-dimensional picture look 3-dimensional. So, what is freedom? Freedom is obviously not our common experience. It's much easier to ask what is not not free, what is bound. Now, Vedanta philosophy is also built on the Sankhya arrangement of things, that what we call our common day experience, the world at large, has 3 interwoven dimensions to it. And these are significantly called gunas. And guna means a rope, something that binds you. In other words, your lack of sense of freedom is because of this intertwining, interconnectedness of these 3 strands, like ropes binding you. So in a sense, we are all in prison, and that is the worst fate of man. You commit a crime, They take your freedom away. It's seen as a very bad thing for you to restrict your freedom of movement. And even if you say you have freedom of expression, common decency will tell you that you don't want to insult somebody else. So there's another restriction to your freedom. There's that poem. I'm not sure who wrote it. You see, two men looked out through prison bars, you see, or through prison walls. One saw bars and the other saw stars. The outlook of each one was different. Now, the Vedanta philosophy tells us that when you take all these dimensions away, when you take the aggregate portion of things away, there is something which is eternal, something which is ever there, and this is free. And if that is the case, two things arise. One is, we don't have to look for freedom. We don't have to make any effort toward it. This can create a big misunderstanding. If you're already free, if there's a unity of existence, in other words, there's no duality, there are no parts, there are no aggregates, then we should just do nothing. We may as well have no effort whatsoever. And all of this spiritual practice or effort to get our freedom is fruitless. So this would be obviously a mistake, because despite the fact that at the root of it, at the analysis of it, when we discover our pure being, our absolute freedom, that we are free already, the kingdom of heaven is within, and we don't have to free ourselves. We are not bound. I remember there was a film once, and a man goes into a town, and he happens to be a very fast gunslinger. Nobody can outwit him. He's very fast with his gun. And he doesn't intend to stay in the town very long, but the town is looking for a sheriff, somebody to regulate the lawlessness which is found in the West, because freedom interpreted as free expression will lead to lawlessness. And anyway, he takes up the job a little reluctantly, and things are so primitive. Yes, we have a jail, they say. Don't worry, let us show you. And the jail is a room with no prison bars whatsoever. And says, well, when you get round to this, well, when we have a few funds and so on and so forth, we'll have a building project and we'll put the bars in. But so far, we never detained anybody there because nobody can catch any criminals. The whole thing is just run by lawlessness elements. Now he catches one of these lawlessness elements and puts him in the prison and draws a line. He says, don't cross this line. Naturally, the person says, but laughs, there's no prison bars at all, so I am free to cross. But you see, the watchful sheriff is such that when he sees him cross, he's immediately there. And then this prisoner gets so used to this room with no restrictions whatsoever, he does not feel he can cross the line. There's another example of taming elephants. First, you chain the leg to a pole or a tree or something like that, something that will restrict the elephant. After a while, you can take the restriction off, but the elephant still feels it is bound. Another example serves to illustrate our sense of freedom, whereas in fact we have a lack of freedom, because that's a dichotomy we already have. We feel that we are free already. We forget that it is within certain confines, that causation and time and space are already restricting factors. And summarized, there are these three binding forces, these three gunas that constrain us. And so it's the example is given by Sri Ramakrishna of a calf or a cow, given a long rope but tied to a pole, is free to roam in many places. It thinks it is free and doesn't realize that it's tethered to the pole and that its movement is highly restricted. And so when we talk about freedom and free will and all of these other things that contain this word freedom, we're possibly making a few wrong assumptions and at the same time, a few right inferences. The wrong assumption is we have freedom, even though we know we don't, because we're always looking for it. From the child of 2 is looking for freedom to exert their will, freedom to roam where they like, freedom to explore. But sooner or later, the child realizes there are do's and don'ts. No, don't touch comes in. And there are consequences. There are short-term consequences, generally categorized as reward and punishment. And as a child's social development changes, the school that they go to, the social environment, that also then finds severe restrictions. Even the most liberal of schools, such as the various Rudolf Steiner kind of development of schools, developing creativity. Even those kinds of, and Montessori and so on, even those kinds of creative environments, you realize you can paint as you like, but don't paint on the walls. So some restriction has to be there in order for us to channel our energy in a useful way, not in an out of control way, because out of control is not freedom. Out of control is simply behaving without any constraints, and that always has adverse consequences. So we have to understand that freedom is with us all, but we brings up the second issue. Why is it that we feel bound? If we are free, why do we feel bound? All the Vedas, all the Upanishads tell us we are free, we are the Atman, we are immortal, and we should make an effort to realize it. But that is because we feel bound. And so systematically, we have to undo our bondage. We have to free ourselves, as it were, or realize our own freedom, which is inherently with us and within us. And yoga, or the system, the practical system of Vedanta, which starts off really with the fact that we feel that there is bondage and the fact that there is a possibility of liberation. And then we have to engage in what is called discrimination, discernment, and practice. That sounds a little intimidating for many people, so we have to clarify many things. There's the useful text on the highest conclusions of the Vedanta philosophy that deals with the subject of freedom. And this is called the Ashtavakra Gita or Samhita. There is a very useful chapter, and a subsequent chapter also, chapter 8, is dealing with the subject of bondage and liberation. And the great sage Ashtavakra is says, it is bondage. What is bondage? It is bondage when the mind desires or grieves at anything. Now let us just analyze that statement. Do you ever desire something? Do you ever grieve over anything? Because a grief means I haven't got what I want, or I had what I want, but it's gone. And now I feel a gap, a disappointment. Be it a life, I wish that this person lived for another 10, 20 years, but unfortunately they're gone, grief comes in. The most extreme trauma will be to do with death and dying. All right. But that's only because you're feeling a loss for yourself. You desire that that person lives. That person on a journey outwards probably doesn't want it. And we have enough experiences from Virginia University in America and so on and so forth to tell us that there is much more beyond this life. We knew it anyway. Logically, we knew it. And those yogis who managed to find out what their previous lives are, they also know it. And the possibility for all of us is to know it. But you see, part of our bondage is to make a small box or a small circle, a small confine, like the calf that thinks it has the freedom to roam around a whole field, and yet it doesn't know that it is tethered. So obliviously, in great, great ignorance. In ignorant bliss, we roam the world looking for our freedom. Now, you may say, I don't deliberately look for my freedom, but that's what it amounts to. And so, religions that say, what is your goal in life? Our goal is not having happiness and freedom here, freedom from pain here, freedom from distress here, freedom from the effects of lust desires and subsequent griefs. We find that after this life, which is intrinsically difficult, painful, and challenging, then there's an area there which is as free as we can imagine it. It's called a heaven, but it's not really freedom. Because as long as we have these aggregates or an appearance of aggregates, we don't have freedom. Is there any freedom in a dream? Yes, we can roam, we can fly like a bird. We can imagine that life is an extended infinite sky and go off and fly infinitely. What a wonderful dream. But unfortunately, we have to wake up from it. And the dreams we have no control over. The only dream we have a control over, or dream-like condition we have a control over, is called meditation. Meditation we can define as a planned dream. We can construct a series of remembrances, delightful remembrances selected from our memory, and say, let us use this in order to lead us to an area where a sense of freedom flashes. And when that happens, then that is called meditation, a process we call meditation. We are always looking for this freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of gender, freedom of expression. And now you see freedom to say what we like, freedom of speech, as I say. And we want our freedom to choose our own career, choose our own path, to do what we like. But we have these restrictions. Society won't tolerate out of control freedom of expression. Can say in a sense of democracy, yes, but the law will come in and it will arrest you if you behave in a truly free way. It leads to some antisocial behavior, or can do, because we have to consider other people also. So we know what bondage is. Bondage is when the mind is restricted by a sense of, I have a small gap in me, or a series of gaps in me, a hollow, some things that are unfulfilled, and I feel I can fulfill them from the outside, and that moves me toward action. That's not free. That's forcing me to do something. Then, of course, grieves and rejects or accepts anything. Let's go through it again. It's bondage when the mind desires or grieves at anything and rejects or accepts anything. Because we have these choices based on maybe cultural likes and dislikes. Like food, I like this food, I don't like that food. This food suits me, that food doesn't suit me. And then we have things that enter into the mind that we reject or accept. Somebody praises me, I feel inflated nicely. I like that person, I accept it. Somebody criticizes me and blames me, then I feel, oh, I want to reject that. I want to reject anything that is painful. I want to accept anything that is happy, joyful. And our strategy is to weave our way between these two extremes, steering a path, but never getting to our destination. Like driving a car, and automatically when it steers off on the one side, we steer it back on the other side. But imagine a journey like that where we never get to our destination called freedom. So Vedanta says it is not heaven. No, it has nothing to do with time, nothing to do with space, nothing to do with causation. It is not deterministic. If it is any way deterministic, it cannot be free. Then, if we have this freedom already within us, can we not get it now? You can. Says Vedanta, you don't have to wait for a post-mortem condition and get it. You're free now. You always were free. You're full and free and perfect. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is in your midst. It is here and now. Many commentators think that Jesus of Nazareth was an apocalyptic person telling us about the end days. No, other people were like that. John the Baptist was like that. But Jesus was telling us, no, here and now. Don't worry about the afterlife. Here and now. Who hath seen the Son has seen the Father. And so it is right here. It is right now. Where is the kingdom? When we will know when it has come. It's a Jewish question. The end of days that is prophesied, where there will be peace among nations, and the dead will rise, and so on. So when will that happen? No. But truth I tell you, it is not here. Lo, it is not here. It is not there, because the kingdom of heaven is within you. It is in your midst. It is right in the depths of you. It is like a grain of mustard seed. You can't detect it. You can't see it. And yet it grows out of all proportion, beyond your whole imagination. That is freedom. Jesus is talking in the language of freedom. And all of the great saints and sages and prophets and rishis and mystics are all experiencing and talking about this inherent freedom. And therefore, you can have it here and now. How long does it take? Ramakrishna answers the question. A cave that is dark for 1,000 years. How long does it take to light? You light a match instantaneously. There you have it. So what is in the way? What is stopping us? Anyway, the text goes on like this. So rejecting and accepting anything feels joy for or feels angry for, then you have bondage. Where you have emotions displayed, frustrations, in other words, because you can't get what you want. And so it goes on the other, that's bondage. What is freedom? Freedom is attained. The language we can use is attained when the mind does not desire or grieve or reject or accept or feel happy or feel angry. Very often in individual personality cultures, personality development courses and so on, there are things which themselves are restricted or restricting. Even religion has these restrictions. Because dogma and doctrine and books can be useful, but they're like a scaffolding, and when you've used the scaffolding, you can throw it away. You don't require it anymore. And if you do require it, it's putting more tethers on. You can think really of it like a person bound head and foot with chains. And we can remove them instantaneously in rare cases, or one by one, progressively. And those who are ever free can say, all right, let me now introduce some restrictions of my own so that I can easily remove them. Like a magician tying a false knot, going like this, and the knot disappears. It's not really a true knot, it's a false knot. Or a person like Houdini, yes, bind me hand and foot, but he knows the technique through secret keys or what have you, of undoing the padlocks. And he is engaging in life in an adventurous way to thrill every part of the audience by delaying this exhibition of freedom. And already he knows he's already in advance done all the necessary things and trained, no doubt, a little bit. If he's underwater, for example, how to hold the breath while he locates the keys, unlocks whatever it is, and undoes everything. And then escapes to a secret passage and appears on a balcony somewhere. All this game is being played like that. To those who know they are free already, life can become a game like that. Not just for the sake of a game, but for the sake and good of others. And so, liberation is attained when the mind does not desire or grieve or reject or accept or feel happy or feel angry or any of the opposite extremes. And desire and grieving, etc., these are modifications of what we call chitta, mind stuff. And it might be likened to a lake. Now we go back now to the Yoga Sutras and its philosophy, understanding the geography of the mind, how a mind is constructed. In other words, freedom's restriction, there's only one thing which is there binding us. It is the mind itself. Now, the mind is composed of these three ropes, these three restricting factors. And we call these ropes or chains that bind us, that is called gunas. Guna means a rope that binds us. And they are threefold. And in the mental field, we can easily identify themselves. One day we feel a little lazy, unenthusiastic, dull-witted. Or we are in a darkness. It can be a dark mood. Or it can be ignorance. You can imagine it like a cloud or cloudy water in the example of the lake where we can see nothing. Everything is disturbed. All the mud is disturbed. Our vision is little to nothing. And tamas means darkness. Darkness implies slowness, inertia, and applies to all life. And in the mental field, which is part of it, applies to that which covers our mind with ignorance. And ignorance leads to ignorant behavior. We are dark, we want to make the whole world dark. This is also characterized, therefore, as evil. But then we have another kind of wave that will be a very slow wave, but a wave that produces the greatest lack of visibility in the mental field. Now, to imagine this, we can see how a lamp, a light bulb, its light is obscured by several layers. We can call these lampshades. Imagine 3, 4, 5 lampshades. And with each layer on the top, the light becomes more and more obscured. But the fact that the eyes shine means it's not completely obscured. Some glimmer is there. Okay, Upanishad tells us these are the eyes of the eyes, the ears of the ears. So behind all that, behind each and every layer and level, will be this one shining light that we call Atman, the eternal self. It is not an aggregate. It is therefore freedom itself. When we discover it, we discover our own freedom. And when we discover it, all these lampshades go. The example is inadequate. They're all disappeared. We find they're all made from the same material, but modified through time and space and all these conditional restraining things called gunas. But these no longer bind us. These are like loose knots that we can easily put on or take off. And so the other element will be this rajas. That rajas will give us another dimension. It'll give us a superimposition of things. It'll cloud our minds by thinking that we have agency. And what is behind it is a sense of ownership and a sense of being a profiteer. It is ours, our action, our effect. It is up to us. This egoistic position will also be an obstacle to our realization of our own freedom. But this egoism comes from an ego, and an ego is a psychosocial development that enables us to move and assert our strength and our authority. It is a necessary thing. And so that same ego that produced a restricting thing for us, a binding thing for us, can actually be an open channel for divine grace to flow. And it flows from somebody called Jivan Mukta, somebody who's free in this life already, who knows all the secrets and can operate this play as they want. They can put in temporary restrictions, they can take them off, they're completely free. If you say that you want to learn a musical instrument, then what is true freedom? True freedom is not playing it. True freedom is having the capacity not to play it, not to engage it, or to engage in it. And when you engage in it, knowing the full capacity of the instrument, you can play up and down the keyboard as you like with complete freedom. In the beginning, it wasn't like that. In the beginning, you had to see what is step 1, step 2. And then the beginning of accessing your own freedom There's an element of self-doubt, no doubt, because you know your restricted self. You don't know your freedom. You don't know your immortal self. So doubt is there, but there are certain resources given to you by nature that can remove that doubt. And just as learning a musical instrument, a competent teacher can come along and tell you, no, please be patient. Do what I do. Here's the note. Here's the note. Move your hands like this. Move your hand like that. And in the beginning, you will be pacing yourselves in a certain way, and it'll be mechanical and it'll be monotonous, but that is where practice comes in. And every time you get an element of praise, there's an encouragement to practice more and more. And then in the next phase, you also practice, and the intervals of the notes become less, and their confidence increases. And as the confidence level increases, something comes in we call faith in yourself. You have to have faith in yourself. You have to have faith in the supreme principle or the goal, which is freedom itself. You have to have faith in all the resources that go toward that, but mainly faith in yourself. That's where it starts. Swami Vivekananda says, I'm paraphrasing, you may think that atheism is lack of belief in God, but I'm telling you that true atheism is a lack of belief in yourself. Trust and believe in yourself. After all, think if this is a series of waves, you can visualize it like that in the ocean or in the lake. And this is a play of waves where the sunlight is reflected, and of the dappling sunlight of the waves is being observed with the freedom there, possibility of freedom, representing as a deep, deep ocean that has unlimited dimensions, no dimensions at all, dimensionless, something of that order. You can call it an ocean of bliss. Well, when we see all these waves dancing, then we can get a glimpse of our true self. Then we should have faith that all these waves are actually part of the ocean. Philosophy as a principle helps this. But when we engage in practice, we start realizing it more and more, and our faith in ourselves gets more and more entrenched. That means fear goes away. Fear is the opposite of faith. And then through practice, the intervals become less. In other words, there's a flow in the music, using the analogy of learning a piano instrument, say. So with the aid of a competent teacher, with faith in oneself and one's ability, with faith in all the resources around you, you go on practicing. The intervals between notes become less. And at an older age, as you continue practice, you assume you never gave up. Giving up is called tamas. Engaging it diligently will have an element of rajas. But at that moment where thoughtlessly, easily you glide across the border, the effort is removed. It becomes effortless. At that point, you have your freedom. At that point, there's a flow. All the gaps in the musical notes become seamless. It now becomes one piece of music that you play. Now you have the freedom to play whatever you like and whenever you like, and the freedom not to play also, or to play. But is it playing for the sake of playing? Not really. The Jivan Mukta will either remain isolated, living out his or her prarabdha karma. We cannot avoid prarabdha karma, that is the accumulated consequence of our actions, and that will have to be played out. During the time it's being played out, the one who is free, that jiva, that soul who is mukti, who is free, who has gained moksha, freedom, not heaven, freedom here now, will have the welfare of all beings at heart. And simply sitting in a cave even, contemplating for the welfare of the world, it'll have its movement for the benefit of the world, or actively engaging in serving fellow man or fellow beings. that will also have its effect. These are the two avenues for the Jivan Mukta. For the Jivan Mukta, getting Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest realization of unity, only once will not work. The Vedantic seers, they say that one cannot attain complete freedom and knowledge if you are experiencing this Nirvikalpa Samadhi once or twice. Once or twice you can experience that, but that's not enough. It's not a one-time thing. Because only by repeated practice can you be established in this area of freedom that we call Brahman. And when you do that, you rid yourself of all the vestiges of these confusing waves, these three binding forces that collectively we call Maya. Maya is a technical term. It means it's not exactly real, it's not exactly unreal. It is a projection. It is Brahman, that immortal, plus conditioning, time and space. And when we engage in this purity, sattva, the other element, which is also binding, when we engage in this, and when sattva becomes more and more dominant, then all these waves in the mind become clarified, and we're able to see a glimpse of this kingdom that sits within. Now, just getting a glimpse is what we're saying is not enough. You have to be established in it, established in sattva, established in purity of thought. And in doing that, we can realize the truth so that everything else appears something like these play of waves, something like a game. So only by this repeated practice will we succeed, just as in the example of the piano, that's the same thing. The seed of ignorance must be fully roasted in the fire of knowledge of Brahman jnana. That means the knowledge of an absolute, unconditioned, not fettered by restrictions of space and time. And so that it cannot germinate again. And then at that point, you are free in this life, Jivan Mukta. Still living in this human body, still living with apparent restrictions. And such a person breaks through the bonds or the fetters of attachment and rushes out of the prison house of the world, just like a lion rushes out of its cage. This freedom is achieved, and we put in parenthesis, when one is rid of ignorance that paralyzes you. The antidote to ignorance would be knowledge. A Jivan Mukta demonstrates by their life and action the reality of Brahman. That free area gets expressed in the conditioned. And the illusoriness of names and forms of the relative world which are there, which disappear when that realization of oneness is sustained. In other words, when you go away from the piano, don't forget, freedom is the freedom to play or not to play. You decide not to play. Withdraw into that inner space, as it were, into that inner realm, into that Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that area of poise, and then come back again. Because that inner poise is a kind of blissful base, and operating from that blissful base, that Jivan Mukta, that person of freedom, will now express this bliss through all the operations of their life. And they will be loving people, they will be love incarnate. There'll be nothing to surpass their love. There'll be a never-ending resource of pure love everywhere. So having themselves crossed the ocean of birth and death, they help others to the shore of immortality. Freedom and immortality are identical terms. So such a person keeps what we call maybe religion alive. It is them that keep it alive. not the theologian, not the erudite theologian, not the ritualist, not the person giving rules and regulations, dogmas and doctrines, saying this book, only this book, giving an exclusivism point of view, only my way or the highway. No. It is the Jivan Mukta that inspires people. And because he's freed from the results of actions, all stored up impressions of past actions and thoughts that is collected, as it were, in the unillumined person, they bring about future embodiments, and so it goes on. And Swami Vivekananda, in one of his lectures, will tell us, because he knows that the Parliament of Religions was held in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition, for the first time they saw the Ferris wheel. He uses it as an example. It's like people getting on and getting off, but the Ferris wheel is always turning. And people get off and people get on, and people just go round and round and round. When you get off and don't go back, that's called freedom. But then you might enjoy the ride again. And this time, I don't have to go around. I can get off when I want. That's the difference. So actions performed by this person, by this Jivan Mukta, after the experience of this nirvikalpa samadhi, without any cycle, this nirvikalpa samadhi, this highest experience that we can get, the effects, they don't cling to that person, because that person is free from desires and free from ego. And whether that person in the super state of samadhi, the super consciousness, or whether they are conscious of the outer world, their illumination is steady, nothing can shake it, and their bliss is constant. And so they may sometimes see others to be they may seem to be like other people, unillumined. They may seem to have desires. They may seem to have fetters. There's no clue about it. And they will still be hungry. They will still be thirsty. They will still want to sleep. They'll still want to engage in pleasurable things. But they're oblivious. Most people do exactly the same things, but the one difference, they're oblivious to their own real nature of immortal consciousness. The Jivan Mukta is always connected with this awareness of their immortal consciousness, but free from all the fetters associated with so-called normal life. And though appearing to be active, they're free from the ideas of, I am doing this is mine. They never forget that the spirit within is always at peace. They can go to that area of poise at any moment in time voluntarily. And though these fetters, these binding chains of gunas, may engage their body in various works, they don't dwell on the enjoyments of the past. They don't deal with the past at all. They take no thought of the future. They're indifferent about the present even. That's complete freedom. They're freedom from the illusory notion of physical individuality or awareness of identity with all beings. There's no clue about it, but inwardly they know. They are conscious that they feel through all hearts, that they walk with everyone's feet, that they eat through everyone's mouth, that they think with everyone's minds, through everyone's minds. They regard the pain and pleasure of others as their own pain and pleasure. When somebody suffers, they will suffer. Physical death and birth have no meaning for that person. A change of body is just like a change of garments, like going from one room to the other. When Ramakrishna passed away and Sharada Devi was so distraught, overwrought with grief, he appears to her, I've only gone from this room to the next room, from one room to another, that's all. And so he doesn't have to come back to the world of darkness again. He's entered into the world of light, even while living. And if compassion for mankind moves him to assume again a body, he's born as a free soul, always conscious of the divine nature, Such souls are there. It's a free choice. Will I just disappear like the salt doll dissolving into the ocean? Or will I resist that and come back? Just to help one person is enough, out of pure compassion. So the Ashtavakra Samhita goes on. It is bondage when the mind is attached to any sense experience. It is liberation when the mind is detached from all sense experiences. That is, from seeing things as if, you can see things as a witness and still engage in the activity. And when there is no I, there is freedom. And when there is I, there is bondage. And considering in this way, this principle, you can easily refrain from accepting or rejecting anything. Because the sense of egoism, sense of ownership and profiteering is really bondage. That's the real bondage. And it constitutes the identification of the self with body and mind. And that is why in the Bhagavad Gita, for the embodiment, love of God is the way, is said to be the way. And egolessness, this is freedom. When there is no ego, there's no identification of the self with the body and mind, and the self is realized as one without any second, pervading the whole universe. Now, having this knowledge, we become perfectly tranquil and free from all the pairs of opposites: desire, aversion, praise and blame, hot or cold. These pairs of opposites just become non-existent. I love you, you love me, oh, you're not loving me, my love is conditional there. No, no such thing. I don't care for reward, says this free person. So, if detachment is the way, then how do we gain this detachment? How do we make things practical? Well, the Ashtavakra Samhita goes on like this. Duties done and not done, as well as the pairs of opposites. When do they cease and for whom? When can we be detached? There's often a misunderstanding. Oh, if I am to be a thoroughgoing non-dualist, then I should have no effort whatsoever. And it says detach, don't own any activities. You're not the doer, so I won't do anything. But Krishna points out that then you can't eat. You can't do ablutions. You can't do all the things that the body demands. That's not detachment. Detachment is mental detachment. It's not physical detachment. So at that point where you have no duties, there are two types of people who say, I have nothing more to do. I have no duties. I have nothing on my plate. I have nothing on my agenda. It is the fool who's laboring under the one fetter of tamas, or it is the enlightened person saturated with sattva. And anyway, knowing thus, that is to be desirelessness, to be desireless, and intent on renunciation through complete indifference to the world, it doesn't mean you escape from your duty. So our life is a mixture of opposites. It's a mixture of joy and sorrow, success and failure, good and evil. And those people who've done the Enneagram will know that each number will have a desire and a fear associated with their personality identification, their ego. And so you will always have preferences which cause people to choose certain things. And in that sense, we have a freedom of choice, what to be done and what to be avoided. But our conceptions of duty have to remain because this is the avenue toward our freedom. And as long as we consider this world to be an absolute reality where we know it's not, it's a transient thing, but we treat it as a permanent thing, we can't escape the pairs of opposites. And we can't eradicate our sense of duty either. So we have to continue with it. And the only way out of this state of things is to realize the unreality of the world. It's not that it's like a mirage and goes. Of course, it's been compared to that. But we take the mirage seriously, and until we cease to see it as a reality, in that moment when we see it as a mirage, the mirage disappears for us. Because our eyes may see it, but our integrity does not see it. It sees it as a series of apparitional things. So until that time, we can treat the mirage, okay, let's treat it for what it appears to be and work with it. Be practical about it. So the only way out of this state of things is to see this unreality of the world as an unreality, in other words, as an impermanent thing, something that changes. The Rishi's word for this world is Jagat, the thing that always changes, and renounce our identification with it. What do we mean by desirelessness? Well, literally, one who is not performing religious rite is really what it was called, because one who's doing an action to get a result, this is called desire. One who's doing an action with no thought of a result, that is desirelessness. And so these rites and verses and vows, they presuppose a desire for earthly or heavenly good. I do an action, even in a religious action, to get something. What is the deity in your house, Lakshmi? Why? I want wealth. Oh, I see. You're manipulating God for it. That's not freedom, because that's not desirelessness. I do an action to get some result. That is desire. I do an action with no thought of the result. This is really desirelessness, either for this world or the post-mortem condition. And really, indeed, my child, says Ashtavakra, continuing, is that blessed person whose desire for life, enjoyment, and learning have been extinguished by observing the ways of people. That is, observing. Some people learn the hollowness of the world by observation of it. I don't see any merit in it. It's like Trivial Pursuit. I can live, I can die. It makes no difference to me, because this world is changing. It comes and goes. It's full of birth and life and death and rebirth. And that's to say, by observing the sufferings of others, they realize that the world cannot give eternal happiness. The classical case, of course, was Gautama Siddhartha, who became Buddha, seeing the miseries and unhappiness in the world, said, let me resolve to apply a certain medicine. Let me think of it in a medical way. Let me try to find a solution to it. But such people are very rare, and the majority get this lesson only after plunging into this world and experiencing for themselves the ills of life and the terrible bereavements and pains that this life provides. And then nature gives us a little knock and moves us up higher. Then gradually we move up the ladder of life until we realize our own blessed freedom as it is, as it was, as it always has been. A perfection that had no blemishes, that was always full and free and perfect, our own immortal nature. This will be our discovery, and it is there available to all of us, and we're all moving towards it at different paces in different time zones and in different historical eras and different geographical locations. But we're all moving toward it, and every atom is thrusting toward it, and the whole universe is moving toward its own freedom and quietude. What a wonderful cosmic miracle this is, and how thankful we should be that we are in this stream toward freedom. May we all attain this freedom, and in so doing, may we all attain this freedom from pain, from distress, from difficulties. May all be blessed with a sense of true freedom. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci, Swami.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.